You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi, and thanks for joining me again on Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm back at my desk putting together the shows in the same way that I did before I went out to mess about in the woods and mountains earlier this year. The show's different, but the intent remains the same. I'm trying to give you stories of men and women who have decided that they want to fulfill a dream by hiking, whether it's just a few weeks, maybe just a day or two, or the whole shebang, a through hike, normally of the Appalachian Trail. This week's guest is one of those people. He started out on the trail several decades ago, and almost accidentally, he's on the verge of completing a multi-year section hike of the trail. In fact, you'll be surprised at how little he actually still has to do. His name is Mike Colburn, or Bassman, and he's been a friend since I met him on the trail, where he was doing another section, back when I hiked it first time in 2014. Our paths have crossed several times since, and I think you'll enjoy hearing from my mate Mike. Another Mighty Blue Class of 2019 member, Nate Stockton, returns to tell about his hike this year. Nate and I have also become good friends, and we'll probably be hiking together at some point next year with the fat guys and gals back in the woods. Nate will be up after Mike. Finally, we're up to Chapter 4 of Paul Stutzman's book, Hiking Through, where Paul fills in some details of his religious past. I've actually had several people write to me asking how I feel about reading a book with religious overtones. My response is that I'm just the reader, enjoying reading the book in the same way that I read any other book and hoping that you're enjoying it with me. It isn't my story, it's Paul's, and I respect his journey as I respect everybody's journey. So now, let's have a listen to my mate, Mike Colburn. Well, I'm going to introduce a guy now who I first met back in 2014, and I haven't been able to stop meeting him ever since. It's Mike Colburn, or Bassman. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Mighty Blue. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah, yes, we can't see each other until we're talking again. And unusually for us, we can't see each other. We really have bumped into each other several times. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now, you've been doing a section hike of the AT, a section through hike of the AT for how many years now?
Well, my first section in Connecticut was 1988, so I guess that's about 31 years.
Wow, that's even longer than I thought, actually. So what was it that sent you out on this mission to do the hike? And what's the history of that? Why get on there? And if you don't mind me saying, why has it taken so long to finish it? Because you're nearly finished, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well.
Well, initially it was something to do in the nearby when my parents and my little brother, who was quite a bit younger than me, right, thought it might be fun to go out for a little day hike, a little excursion in the corner of Connecticut, and it was just, I found it to be kind of mesmerizing, and we did a few of those over the course of a few years in the late 80s. And then they moved to Georgia, and it was convenient then when we went down to visit them to do little bits and pieces of the Georgia section. And I just got, kind of obsessed with it. Over the years, I've been working pretty continuously, so I never really had a chance to go out and do it all at once. So it just became a 1 week or long weekend, or kind of the yearly thing to do. And I got addicted and never really thought I'd finish it, but actually at this point I'm down to about my last 3/4 of a mile that I'll plan on trying to get to at some point soon.
Yeah, well, we'll get people to guess while they're listening to you to work out where that 3/4 of a mile is. But we'll come to that in a minute. So what was it? What was it about the trail that actually mesmerized you so much? Was it the people? Was it was it the foot-wide trail? Was it the rocks? I mean, what was getting you at times? Because I know that when I did Connecticut this year, I loved it and I found it really tough. So what was it about the trail that you liked?
Well, it was good exercise. That it was a good wholesome way to spend some time. I guess I'm maybe a little bit goal-oriented, a little bit checklist-oriented. I'm an actuary and numbers person.
Oh, dear. That explains a hell of a lot, Mike.
but the actual experience out there each time I was out there walking was very therapeutic. It was a great way to just escape from any issues that were going on with work or with family, with kids that were having trouble when they were little or that were being trouble when they were teenagers. Yeah. It was just a great way to get away for a little bit and experience the outdoors.
And have you involved other members of your family in coming on the trail with you?
Over the years, yeah, a little bit. As I said, the first couple hikes were with my parents and my little brother, who were looking for something to do to get out and get some air. And as my kids were growing up, I introduced them to the trail. None of them took to it as much as I did, but they've retained kind of an interest in occasionally going out with me. I did a little bit with my wife. In fact, she rather than being a hiker, she thought it would be kind of fun to do slack pack and shuttle me for a Virginia stretch this year. Yeah. I've included the family to an extent. I anticipate trying to include as many of them as possible for the final section that I do. But over the years, it's been mostly a solo effort, but a little bit each year. And there was a stint of a period of years where, with my late father, when he was when he was still able to hike, did a lot of years of 3 and 4 day section hikes with him. He's probably the person I've hiked the largest amount with of anybody. But yeah, family to some extent, but a lot of it solo. Once you get down to those last few sections, you got to go and you you have to hike your own hike, even as a section hiker.
Absolutely. There's no question. In fact, now you've mentioned your father, as you said, your late father, that's kind of a bit of a clue. You'd actually saved your finish for one specific spot, hadn't you, for a specific reason. Tell us about that.
Well, as over the years, as my parents, I mentioned they had moved to Georgia, and I did some sections there. Well, they've originally are from Maine and retired to Maine, so I did the sections there. And I found myself, was about halfway done without really any place that I could look forward to have sort of being the symbolic finish. Sure. Except that as it turns out, the paved wheelchair accessible stretch along the Hudson River near the Bear Mountain Bridge is one that I ended up deciding I would save, and I thought that I'd be able to accommodate, relatives, parents, whoever, that even myself, if who may not be that mobile at that point in time. And that is actually the final section. It's about 3/4 of a mile through the Trailside Zoo and along the pond down there at a state park that's wheelchair accessible, and that's the last 3/4 of a mile for me. But my father, unfortunately, passed away last year. Didn't quite make it. But my mother's going to be there, and even though she can't walk that well, I think we'll figure out. We'll get a wheelchair, and she can join me and the rest of my family for that little stretch. But yeah, it's that last little wheelchair accessible stretch.
Yeah. I know when you told me that was that's kind of sad that your dad didn't make it, but he knew what you were doing. Obviously, he'd shared the trail with you, so I'm sure he knew you were going to get it done. And so I'm sure that was one of those things. That's just a shame it can't be.
Yeah. We hiked. I probably hiked 500 or 600 miles with him over the years, and he had been a few years since he'd been able to do any hiking with me. But I was kind of hoping that if it got close to the end and he was still there, that I'd be able to push him that last stretch so he could join me for it.
Yeah. So you say you're goal oriented, and you were doing day hikes, and there was when did it become a firm plan that you were going to get this done? Was it quite late on, or you were just doing bits of the trail, and were you actually doing different bits of the trail every time?
Yeah, I was over the years when I was hiking with my dad. After we did a little bit of Maine when they lived up there, did a little bit of Connecticut, a little bit of Georgia. Then we kind of had a plan that we try to do a 3 or 4 day stretch in each state. So we did a bunch of those stretches, but there were still huge gaps. It's not that much you can get done in 3 or 4 days in a year. So I would say I never really anticipated it being likely I'd finish until just the last couple of years. I had a stint out of work in 2009 where I was able to get several hundred miles, and then in 2014 was another break in my work career where I was able to do a fair amount of section hikes. Right. It really was only then that I got close enough where I felt like it was realistic to finish. But even being back to work starting in 2015 again, it all of a sudden now I was down to a relatively small amount of vacation time a year. But I would say by 2015 I thought it was pretty realistic, and the feet and knees held out for the last couple of years for some big section hikes, and here I am knocking on the door.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really is. So let's go back to 2014 when we met. Do you remember what section that was on?
The first time I met you was just before the roller coaster section in Northern Virginia. and I met you at a lunch break at Rod Hollow Shelter, I think it was.
That's right.
And you were going to go all the way through the section all in one day. I knew I wasn't going to make it with my section hiker legs, but yeah, that was it. And then after I went home after that section hike and came back to a section a little farther north a few weeks later, and just by coincidence caught you on the trail as you were recording one of your blog entries.
It is amazing how these things go, and it really is. So, and have you found that your interaction with hikers doing it all in one go as opposed to section hikers is different, or have you found that people accept whatever people are doing on the trail?
The thru hikers that I've met in my section hikes are all they've all been great. They're friendly. I don't typically hang with them that long because they're in a lot better shape than I am usually. But
that's why you hiked with me. That's why you hiked with me, because I wasn't.
Actually, I hiked with you because I was able to get off the trail and come back and meet you farther down the trail.
Yeah.
But I've been out 3 or 4 days, and I've tried to exercise a little bit beforehand so that I can at least stay with the same group for a couple of days, and that's made it a lot of fun. I feel like I've developed, in addition to you from 2014, I've developed pretty good friendships with a number of other hikers in my section hikes in other years. I've always tried to time it so that I was on the trail with the thru-hiker bubble, the northbound thru-hiker bubble.
Oh, interesting.
I pretty much had to do that because my wife still doesn't like me to go off hiking in the woods alone. So that's a way I can go off alone, but not really be alone. And in the process, I meet you and lots of other great hikers.
Yeah, I find it interesting that how we met for one day, but we really kind of immediately bonded. We got on really, really well. And have you found that over the years that the trail removes a lot of those defences people normally put up in everyday life?
It absolutely removes the defenses. You're in a shelter or you're sitting on a log at a break, and there's an immediate sense of friendship and camaraderie. You're all kindred spirits. Everybody is living. Their focus is just being in the woods, walking, eating. It's so much less complicated, and I think that makes it so much easier for everybody on the trail to relate to each other.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was for me. I know that immediately. I can't remember. Where did you leave me? Was that at the 501 shelter? Was that another? That was the same time. Was it the 501 shelter? You went off and you came back and bought some beers.
Yeah, that was one of the section hikes in 2014 where I bumped into you again. Yeah, I dropped you at the 501 shelter. Yeah, and that was right at the end. Actually, the end of my section hike was just before that, but I think it was only a couple miles up the road, so I had to practically drive past there on my way home. So yeah, I thought I'd pop in since that shelter was close to the road. I thought I'd pop in with a bag of sodas and beers, and sure enough, there were a bunch of you there that seemed more than happy to have something to drink other than water.
Yeah, that's never going to be a problem, giving away beers, let me tell you. And I got to tell listeners that Mike generously, even though we'd only hiked together a short period of time, said, when you're up in Connecticut, make sure you contact me, and I'll run you around and do whatever. Do you remember what I actually, when we did meet in Connecticut, what I wanted to buy?
Yeah, you needed to buy something to boil water in because evidently you had a mishap with your jet boil.
Massive.
With a problem with some rice burning on, if I recall correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I drove you around. It was that particular town in Connecticut wasn't that well stocked with hiking supplies, so I think you ended up having to go into a hardware store and buy some like heavy metal skillet or something. A
clanking skillet that was on my backpack for ages. Yeah, it was a nightmare. I don't know how I got through it. I really don't. So now, when you split the trail into a number of sections, what are the logistics like? Because if you've only got a few days, do you drive to places that you haven't been to, or do you fly? I mean, because this could work out to be quite expensive if you're moving all over in different sections.
Yeah, I've only flown once to one of the section hikes.
Right.
When I was to do a section or half of the Smoky Mountains with my dad in I don't know 2000 or something. That was a time where they were down in Georgia. He was down in Georgia. It was a relatively easy drive up for him, and that was just too far to drive for a 3 or 4 day trip. When they were down in Georgia, living there, a lot of times we'd drive down to visit them and go, drive 1 or 2 hours from their house outside of Atlanta up there. So I might be flying down to Atlanta to visit them, but a lot of times we just drove to Atlanta for a long week. So I was able to work out those drives. All the places from the Mid-Atlantic up to Maine are all relatively accessible by a long drive from Connecticut, where as you said, where I live. And then the last couple sections down in northern North Carolina and in Virginia, those were pretty crazy. I drove them, and the typical arrangement would be I'd leave work on Friday and drive, into as late as I could, stay at a motel someplace for 4 or 5 hours, and then get up early and drive the rest of the way to the trail. I'd arrange a shuttle ahead of time, but I'd pretty much be driving, straight through after work, and then I'd probably, do my hike and get back to the car and drive, from the car straight back to Connecticut. It could be 9-10 hours. A little bit treacherous, probably not the safest thing, but it was. So the logistics, in short, the logistics to get all those different section hikes done involved an awful lot of driving. You
are obsessed. I mean, that must be so. That must be so difficult. And you're right. After hiking all day and then driving back is not the good idea. I seem to remember when I finished a day's hiking, I was ready for bed.
Yeah, it was. There was a fair amount of coffee consumed, and en route on the drives back. But in the end, so far, no mishaps, no. I managed to get enough rest and drink enough coffee to get there, but it was sure the planning, the logistical planning of figuring out how to get down there as quickly as possible right after work, so that I could make as much use of my precious vacation time as possible. That was quite the exercise, mental exercise over the years.
Yeah. So and I always say to people, you'll get the physicality when you're doing a through hike. You walk long enough miles, you'll get your legs. So you said you did a 250 mile hike. Did you get that feeling of getting your legs?
The longer hike that I've done was a hike out west, but with the AT, the longest stretch I did there was about a week. But what I would do is we got a nice steep hill in nearby, about 15 minutes away in town, and I just go up and down that hill. Just however many, 8 times. The people that were out there walking their dogs and would look at me like I was crazy, going up and down. But that was the best way I could think of to get to the point where I could handle the hills. Yeah. Because I'm telling you, the Appalachian, even the flat parts of the Appalachian Trail, they're still a lot hillier than what than your typical walk around the neighborhood. So
yeah, I got to say, if you look at the profile of the Appalachian Trail on the maps, trust me, it is nowhere near as flat as it looks.
But I'll admit, with those section hikes, I was always pretty much beat by the end. So I never really was out there long enough to feel like I got the really good trail legs. But I trained enough, and to have it feel like each time like it was a rewarding experience, and I didn't get injured, and couldn't walk up and down stairs that well for a few days afterwards. But it was all worth it.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't need to do too much training for this last section, though, do you? So they should be okay. Now, they weren't the last. That wasn't the last time we met in 2014. We actually met again, didn't we? Just after I crossed the Kennebec River, or actually, I was coming out of Caratunk, I think. And you were going. I think I was going north, and you were going south. It's just one of the serendipitous things of the trail where you just bump into people, don't you?
Yeah, that was completely out of the blue. I think. After we had met in Connecticut, just the timing of the trail, it was pretty obvious I wasn't going to be able to connect with you with my section hike schedule that fall. So to bump into you just in passing, I think I had just dropped my car off in Caratunk at the trailhead and was probably had like a 2-minute wait for my shuttle, and during that brief period of time, you strolled right through. And right out of the blue. And I'm telling you, I'll add it to it. You didn't look that good. I think you were.
I'd lost a lot.
You were pretty beat towards the end of that 2014 hike, as I recall, and you looked pretty gaunt and shabby, but it was still great to see you. And yeah, as you said, totally serendipitous.
Gaunt and shabby, that's 2 nice words to call me. I appreciate that, old friend. That's really good. So let's move forward to this year, because we bumped into each other yet again. First, I think it was at Daleville or Troutville or something. Yeah, it was Daleville, wasn't it? Yeah. And Was that a coincidence, or did you know I was going to be there at that stage? Because you were coming down for another section, weren't you, with Patty, your wife?
Yeah. I think I was coming down, and as long as I was, once we had our plans straight, I sent you a text just to let you know I'd be on the trail, and it just turns out that you were right in the neighborhood, that you're right around there. So so it was great to get together for a slightly nicer dinner than it would be literally on the trail.
Slightly, yeah.
An Italian place, but yeah, it really wasn't until just a couple of days before that I realized that I'd be down there starting my section slack pack, right about the time that you'd be there. So that was great.
Did you enjoy that slack packing? Because I mean, personally, and I know some people don't like slack packing. I love it. There's you carry with you what you need for that day, and Patty was around, and what you needed for that day was the pack with your water and a bit of food, wasn't it?
It was enjoyable. It was largely her idea. She thought this was an opportunity. She had a lot of responsibilities over the years, raising the kids and then helping with parents as they got older. But there was a window there where she thought it'd be kind of fun to come down. So I was not about to tell her no. I don't want to be slack packed every day. So I thought it was great. There was I did one overnighter during that stretch. It was kind of a rugged section in Virginia, but it was really kind of fun to be able to have company each night that it wasn't smelly and get a restaurant meal each night, get a restaurant breakfast each morning, and a nice bed in motels. Yeah, it was a nice change. I've loved the backpacking over the years. I love the rugged, tiring, exhausting experience.
Sure.
It's rewarding once you come through, but it was that was a real pleasant change of pace.
I'm sure. So that was your start of your section. So you had already done the Virginia Triple Crown, hadn't you? And McAfee Knob and Devil's Backbone and Tinker Cliffs. When did you do those?
That was a section hike in 2012, I believe.
Right. That was awesome, isn't it? You say, have you got the picture of yourself sitting with your legs dangling over the end of the McAfee Knob?
Well, unfortunately, it was fogged in that day, so I was able to get a picture of me standing on the overlook, but it was you can definitely see it's McAfee Knob, but there's nothing in the background, and I've seen some beautiful pictures, including some of yours of just clear sunrise mornings there, and unfortunately it wasn't in the cards for me. So I have my picture, but it's just a silhouette, a foggy silhouette. But you know what? You take your chances, and you can't get 180 days of sun for your hike. So I have great, beautiful pictures from some days, and McAfee Knob was maybe a little bit of a bummer.
Well, that's exactly how I feel, actually. You've got to take those great, the great views and the looks when they're there, because they may not be there even 5 minutes later. So you when they're there, just enjoy them for what they are. But that's, once again, is accepting what the trail throws at you, isn't it?
Absolutely. I have images of other places. Tray Mountain in Georgia was one that I thought that might have been a nice view, but I went up over that with my dad just in the fog and rain, and that's the breaks. But boy, and there's been a lot of nice views in Virginia and New Hampshire and Maine. I had a lot of days where it was pretty beautiful. So,
yeah. Well, look, we were slack packing going south, and we saw you again a few days later. I think I was telling Trigger about you, about how many times I bumped into you, and then literally, I think it was a couple of minutes later, we bumped into you again. And I don't know how it goes. So neither of us knew the other was going to be there. It's just the way it works out, I guess. And then once more. Yeah. At Devil's Backbone Brewery having dinner. What do you think of that place, by the way?
That was a great, I will call it a trail experience. Perhaps it's a little bit generous to call it a trail experience, but that's a great place with their connection with the trail, and it is nicely located in a stretch that's pretty wooded and not a lot of other facilities around for quite a few miles. So I thought that was just fabulous to hike hard and get a ride down to the hike hard all day, get a ride down to that place, and even as a section hiker, have great meal, great beers, and then my understanding is that facilities they provide for the thru hikers with the camping facilities down there are pretty generous and pretty nice too.
They really are. It's a great spot to camp, and they got toilets and showers, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's not a privy, I tell you. So it's really enjoyable. So on your journey, then, when did you actually summit Katahdin?
That was 2007. That was
quite a way back then.
Yeah, it was my parents had retired to Maine, and my dad was still hiking at that point, and it just seemed like that was an activity to do. As another kind of hiking related activity, I've been collecting as many state high points as I've been able to over the years.
All right.
Not all of them involve any hiking. A lot of them are just drive up, but there's a bunch of them that are some pretty rigorous hikes. And Katahdin in Maine was one of them on that list. And so there was a couple of friends I have that I've done some state high point hiking with. Thought that it would be time to try to tackle Maine. So I went up there, picked my dad up on the way up, and And it was just a day hike. It was a weekend excursion.
Oh, right. Wow. That's with not having your legs go up there. I saw a lot of people doing it, but I would find that tough because I'd forgotten, and I don't know how much you remember it, but I'd forgotten how dramatic the climb is once you get above tree line. It suddenly you opens up. You've got almost a rock face in front of you to go up, haven't you?
Yeah, it's not walking. It's definitely scrambling. And yeah, that 2007 is a weekend trip. That took it out of me. That was tough.
I bet.
In 2014, when I was accompanied one of my college buddies on the end of his multiple year section hike, I was and this was after I'd done a lot of hiking that summer long, including with you, various stretches earlier in the summer. I was in pretty good shape, so it was a lot easier. But it's still no walk in the park. That is a rigorous climb up there, but you get rewarded with the views. Boy, that's a special place up there in Katahdin.
So on the day you went up, was it weather decent?
Unfortunately, no. The 2014 day, the 2007 day when I just went up there just for the day, that was a nice day to hike up there. Yeah, 2014 when I finished with a bunch of the thru-hikers from that year, it was that particular day, October 4th or whatever. It was a pretty crappy day. It had been beautiful for a few days beforehand, but it was drizzling and no visibility. But you know what? You could see that sign at the top, and that's all you needed to see.
Oh yeah, there's something about seeing it. Yeah, was there a little bit of regret that Katahdin wasn't the finish, or did you understand how people wax lyrical or get excited about Katahdin being the finish?
Well, there's a little regret, but at the time I did Katahdin, I had no expectation I'd ever finish the trail. I was 12 years ago, and
Course,
I hadn't had any of my periods out of work, shall we say. I've never had any of those yet, so I wasn't really thinking that I'd ever get a chunk of time off. So it was do Katahdin or not do Katahdin as a state high point. And in the subsequent years as I finished, I realized that it would have been nice to maybe save that for the end, but. I did it while the doing was good, and I have no regrets. And I had a great time with a couple of my thru-hike 2014 thru-hiker buddies.
Yeah.
Joining them up there in 2014, that was great. That was it's still pretty special, even though I'd been up there. So
when you go out now, and I didn't realize it was back to 1988. I mean, you must have told me, but I don't remember it being that far back. Do you revisit your gear choices each hike, or have you largely stuck with the stuff for about the last 10 years or 10, 12 years that you had in the early part of this century, I guess?
Well, I've absolutely revisited the gear choices over the years. I'm not all that obsessive. See if I can pare off all the weight and buy all the new stuff. I'm pretty much of a cheapskate and try to conserve my gear. So there's a lot of stuff.
You're an actuary. That's
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm a pinch penny. So I do, but nevertheless, I do try to keep the gear reasonably up to date. So I probably change a few items each year, but as an actuary, I absolutely keep a detailed list of all the gear, how much it weighs, and so at least I know how unnecessarily heavy my pack is to help motivate me to at least trim it down a little bit.
Now, just as a slight segue, and just to take us off the subject of the AT, you also completed a thru-hike of the John Muir Trail, which I have not been able to do. I've failed spectacularly twice at that. Tell us how your thru-hike plan, because you did it by yourself, a lot of it, didn't you? But that wasn't the plan, was it?
No. My one of my college buddies who in fact the one that I was with him when he finished his AT section hike in 2014. He's similar to me, and he's been very detail-oriented, makes lists, plans, and he knew maybe in 2011 that he was going to be done with the AT by 2014, and he wanted to do the John Muir Trail, therefore, in 2016. Right. So for probably 5 years before 2016, which we talked about doing the John Muir Trail. And then so of course, as planned, he finished the AT in 2014. I hadn't finished yet, but I was interested in joining him on the John Muir Trail. Sure. So we got out there. Another one of my one of my high point hiking friends, in fact, the woman who did Katahdin with my dad and me in 2007. The three of us, she, me, and then my college AT buddy, arranged to go out there to do the John Muir Trail in September 2016. And the reason I ended up doing most of it alone was so sadly, my friend had a problem with his knee, blew his knee out on the first day. he got up and down. He got up and was able to get back down, but I guess he had a baker's cyst or something on his knee. He said bad knees, so he had to quit after the first day.
Right.
And then so Ellen and I continued. But after about 5 days, you get back to where you can get off the trail and back into Mammoth Lakes, the town there. And she was. It was pretty. I had budgeted too many miles per day because I'm still on limited vacation time at that point. And so I think at that point she was ready to get off the trail. I think I had planned too much. But of course, obsessive compulsive me says, well, I'm still out here.
Yeah.
There's bound to be other people on the trail. So I talked to my wife on the phone, and under the circumstances, she said, well, go ahead. So I did the last 12 days solo on that, making it to the end and having that wilderness experience, beautiful mountain experience, was just one of the great experiences of my life.
I'm sure it was.
Even though solo.
Yeah, because you finish on the top of Whitney, don't you?
Yes,
is there a point that you touch? Is there a marker, or what is it? You just get to the top of the mountain? It's
kind of a relatively flat open area, but there is one of those brass, 3 or 4 inch circle brass benchmarks.
Right.
One of the big chunks of granite up there. There's a small stone building up there, almost literally at the top. It's kind of a landmark.
I've seen that, yeah.
And there's always a few celebrating happy people and one of the most amazing views in the world up there.
I'm sure.
So that was a pretty special ending.
So now you've done the thru hike. That is a thru hike. Anyway, obviously a one and done thru hike, as it were. That 220 miles, something like that.
Yeah.
Did you find differences between your section hiking mindset and your thru hiking mindset?
Actually, not a whole lot. Once I had planned and had enough gear and had enough food, each day was let's get up, let's get on the trail, let's just do the trail, let's just look around, let's see everything, let's experience it all, and let's get to camp that night. And whether it's 6 or 7 days, doing that on the AT and a thru hike, or 18 days out on the John Muir Trail, it's a very similar kind of routine.
Right.
It was quite nice. Knowing I enjoyed the experience, so that having the extra amount of time for the John Muir Trail was quite nice, and that was quite a bit more remote. But again, as long as I had enough food in my bear canister, and
sure.
and in the water supply out there was pretty substantial that time of year. I had no worries.
Sure.
I had my tent, my clothes, and I was lucky that I didn't have any foot problems or anything, for 18 days when I'd never really gone for more than 5 or 6 days before.
Yeah.
There were a lot more days, but each day was just as delightful on the John Muir Trail as it is on the Appalachian Trail.
Awesome. Now, getting back to the AT to finish up.
Okay.
You're finishing soon. You've done 2,191.25 miles. You've got 0.75 to go. Are you looking forward to finishing, or is there a tiny bit of regret that it's soon going to be over?
There's both. There is a tiny bit of regret that it's soon going to be over, but part of me says, let me get this done. And so it's been 4 or 5 months now since I did the section hike that got me to the verge. So part of me wants to get this done. So I'm in the process now of figuring out when, in the hopefully very near future, I can congregate enough family and friends there to do it right. I feel like if I do it right and have the people that I love with me, that'll be a great thing. And I know it'll be sad when there's no more new Appalachian Trail to do, but it'll be great to have done it. And I feel like there'll be lots of opportunities to maybe share the experience with my kids if they ever decide they want to do a little bit more, or friends that or other family members who maybe are a little bit interested in trying it, because I've done it. And I look forward to the opportunity to do some hikes with them. Maybe even join you for a little bit if you go out for your third time at some point.
What I was thinking, Mike, actually, funny, I was thinking about this before I came on. I joined this little group, the Fat Guys, and it's now called the Fat Guys and Girls, back in the woods. And we do, or we've done, I only did it once, but I'm thinking of doing it again this year if it doesn't clash with another hike I want to do. Why don't you just join them and we can hike together? Because we haven't actually hiked together that much. And it'd be nice to spend some time hanging out with you by a campfire and chatting and just generally talking. So perhaps you give it a bit of thought, because you'll then be looking for new challenges. So it'd be a kind of nice thing to do.
Well, you know what? That I hadn't really thought too much past the current AT, but that's a great idea, Mighty Blue. That's that could be the way to get it for me to get my taste each year, so that I don't lose, so that I don't lose that feel.
Yeah. So when you look back at this now, just the last question then, what have you taken from this experience? Is there something you've learned about yourself? Because it's going into its fourth decade now, as you started. Have you learned something about yourself while you're hiking?
I've learned a little. I've learned how to push myself a little bit. I've learned how to plan and think things through a little bit more carefully. I've learned how to just be a little bit more self-sufficient.
Right.
And I think I feel that it's been a valuable experience to just spend time in the woods, at night, to camp at night. I feel like there's been certain fears and things that maybe people get too used to in modern society with work and cities.
Sure.
And I feel like it's an extremely good thing to step away from that a little bit. And even if you can't step away for 6 months or 5 months, to be able to step away for a few days and just get out there and have kind of a back to nature experience has been fulfilling, and I feel like something, even a little taste of that would be good for everybody. Yeah. And I'm glad I've my obsession with completing that trail has forced me to get out there and get out there alone and put some fears aside and then go get some good healthy exercise.
And have you put Patty's fears aside as well?
I don't know, but I managed to get through the trail with timing it reasonably with the thru-hiker bubble, and that she and she's seen me come through it. So yeah. I feel like I've helped her to at least see vicariously that you can go out and do some things that might have seemed pretty scary Absolutely. When you thought about it, but then once you just went out and did it, it was thrilling and positive.
Yeah. Well, look. I can't tell you how pleased I am, and I am hoping to be there. I've got to work out, obviously, the logistics for me as well, because I think you've just done a great job, and you've been a great friend over the years. Surprising, you meet someone for a short period of time, so I'm just so delighted for you, and I just wish you well when you do that last 3/4 of a mile with your mother and your family around you. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you very much, and I'll see if I can arrange it so that you can be there too. That would be fabulous.
Okay, buddy. Well, take it easy. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mighty Blue. Take care.
Cheers. Bye. Mike is such a great guy, and our bonding on the trail 5 years ago was very real and very memorable to me. We shared just the Appalachian Trail, yet that is more than enough for two people to share a lot of experiences. I hope that he comes out with the Fat Guys next year and that I can join him and them. Talking about fat guys, let's move on to Nate Stockton, another buddy I've met through hiking. There's a theme there, isn't it? Friendships are quick to start and solid once you share experiences on the trail. I hope that, if nothing else, some of you are lucky enough to get friendships in your time on the trail. Here's Nate. And I'm on with another member of the class of 2019, Nate Stockton, or Turd Ferguson, which is a pretty splendid name, Nate. So tell us all about it.
Okay. So I was doing a section a few years ago down in, I believe it was, actually it might have been North Carolina. Yeah. And I was just kind of hanging out with the guys from Fat Guys and doing that, just sitting around the fire or whatever. And I started doing that skit where Norm Macdonald plays Burt Reynolds, and Burt changes his name to Turd Ferguson. And so it just kind of stuck from there. I think Sherpa will give him credit. He likes to take credit for giving me my trail name, so we'll go ahead and give that to him.
Well, some of these cultural references, Saturday Night Live particularly, the only one I'd ever heard of was the "We Need More Cowbell" with Christopher Walken, and that was mentioned once on the show. But I'd never heard of Turd Ferguson. But it fitted you rather nicely. I've got to tell you, you grew into the name quite nicely, didn't you?
Yeah, people always give you that double take, like they didn't hear you right the first time, yeah. Or some of them are like, "Oh, that's offensive. I'm not going to call you that." And I'm like, "Well, it's going to be more offensive if you don't call me that."
So you started early, and we established this when we spoke before. But you started in January. You did a number of miles. I think you got to the NOC, didn't you?
No, I got to Chunky Gal Trail.
Oh, that's right, Chunky Gal
Trail. Which is what, 85 miles?
Right.
I think. Yeah, it was right after Muskrat Creek Shelter.
Yeah.
And I got off.
And how cold was that?
How cold was it? Oh
yeah.
My gosh. So I came down the mountain in a ice storm, and there was really slippery. The trees were all blown over and broke. So I was actually having to do some bushwhacking quite a bit, and also the government was shut down, so nobody was on the trail maintaining the trails. It was nasty.
and then you got off the trail, but to finish up leaving the army, and you got back. When did you get back on?
I started back on March 22nd.
Right, so you were about a month behind me. But of course you caught up, like everybody else catches me on the trail. We met on the trail at Harper's Ferry, didn't we? I think actually that town just outside Harper's, and we hiked on and off. Yeah, we hiked on and off for about 400 miles. It was about 400 miles, wasn't it? Something like that together.
Yeah, easily 400. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the way from Harper's to what was it? Just when did we leave you guys?
Well, it's actually, it's funny actually, when these things happen, and it happened to me when I did the trail first time, some of the details really blur in your mind, don't they? You do lose context of the trail, although I've been glad that I could see the trail a second time, so I know roughly where things happened. So,
we caught up with you in Vermont.
Yeah, we met up again in Vermont, and you were when you were hiking with Sharktooth's dad. How did you get to hike with Sharktooth in the first place?
So we met in Newfound Gap, actually. It was supposed to be 59 and sunny.
Right.
And I got to Newfound Gap, and it was snowing and ice, and the winds were like, everything was blowing sideways.
Right.
And I was going into Gatlinburg to resupply, and her group were getting back on trail.
Right.
That at the same time. And I ended up giving them a whole bag of brownies that somebody, some trail angel had gave to me. And so I ate half the bag of the brownies and gave them the other half when I met them going back out.
Yeah, quite right. But then, the people were coming and going. You were in this group for a while, and people were dropping off, weren't they? And you ended up with Sharktooth. Did you enjoy hiking with her?
Oh yeah. It was different. I mean, we certainly had some boundaries that we had to set that we didn't talk about specifically, because our politics is completely different.
Funny. I did that with Trigger.
Everything was different.
I did that. I had that with Trigger. Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny also? A number of people have mentioned this on Facebook, how great it is that people can have such differences in opinion or beliefs and still be perfectly happy hiking with each other. And it's one of the really good things about the trail. It's a great leveler, don't you find?
Yeah, and once you find somebody that hikes your speed and your days are very similar, man, you don't want to lose those people that you're hiking with because they complement you so well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably what with me and Sharktooth, developing a friendship and just being able to go 1,800 miles. It's basically luck and being able to get along with each other. And then, your hiking styles have to be extremely similar or else you're not going to end up hiking with the same people all the time.
But you were hilarious. You made me laugh a lot. I could say it. I could hear you laughing a lot. So that was always fun. Now you mentioned you've been on with the Fat Guys and Gals back in the woods, and as you know, that's where we met because I was in the Fat Guys as well. What differences did you notice straight away being a thru hiker as opposed to, say, a week-long hiker? Because the Fat Guys were out there for a week. Did you learn pretty quickly it's a very different dynamic?
Yeah. So, I definitely would change my plans when I was hiking based on weather conditions. When you're just doing a small section, you don't really worry about putting up big miles or where am I going to resupply, things like that. When you're through hiking, you're, always like, okay, well, I got to get to this town or I got to do this many miles to get over this mountain before the rain comes or else I'm going to be slipping on the boulders.
Yeah.
It's just so many different dynamics go into the through hike that it's really tiresome when you think about it. 'Cause, I always wanted to just eat and go to sleep at the end of the day, but you really got to plan kind of what your next day was going to be like. And we would, people would always ask us, well, where are you going to today? And me and Charters would just kind of look at each other and be like, well, we'll just go until we get tired. But really, we always had kind of an idea of where we needed to be, because if not, you were going to have to work harder the next day.
Yeah. It is a very different mindset, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is. And I don't want to say it's not fun, because it's great, but it's kind of like your job a little bit when you're doing a thru hike. I mean, you have to meet your gates along the way. You have to, you just, when you're section hiking, it's just more, I think for me, it's fun because you're just hanging out with the guys you haven't seen in a year.
Sure.
And, everybody's telling their stories and catching up and having a good time. It's a little bit different,
Isn't that interesting though? It feels like a job, and I've heard this said before, and I guess I probably felt it as well. And it becomes your life, doesn't it? For that period of time you're out there, that is all you think about, the walk, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's wash, rinse, repeat, every day.
Absolutely. Or in fact, not wash, repeat.
Yeah. But the thing is, you have to look at finding those gifts every day that the trail gives you, whether it be like an eagle flying down the river,
sure,
or, like an amazing waterfall where you somehow managed to blow a lot of miles away that day already, and you can go swim. Yeah. Finding those little nuggets.
I saw you do that a few times.
That make it all worthwhile.
I saw you doing that a few times. Yeah. So, from what you've been, you've done the bits that we've done in the week. Was the trail more diverse than you expected, or was it as you expected? I mean diversity from not from the point of people, but from the point of different type of hiking. Because I think when you look at it, the trail breaks down into a bunch of different sections, doesn't it? And they're just all. I find them all different, and I found that you need different skills for different parts of the trail.
It's funny because each state you enter into, it seems like the terrain changes.
Yes,
from
absolutely.
State to state. It's like you hit that, that border sign, wherever it is, and it's like, oh my gosh, the forest just changed. Or, now we got rocks all of a sudden.
That's
or
right.
There's roots everywhere. It changed, it seemed like, for every state. And I guess you take notice of that. I don't know. But I definitely found that. I mean, when you're going through Vermont, like we didn't have a whole lot of mud, but there was mud and roots. Yeah. And then you get to, New Hampshire, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're climbing, all these rocks.
It was extraordinary.
And then you get to Maine, and it's like rock faces going up like a bald pate, and some of those other ones, and the Bigelows. It was amazing. In
fact, but the two you just mentioned, Baldpate Mountain, that beautiful bare mountaintop, and just going up this rock face, I just thought it was fantastic up there. And we went up on a beautiful day as well. And I think generally we had pretty good weather this summer, don't you?
I can't complain. There was only two times I think I hiked when it was really rainy and cold, and that was that miserable day on like Jane Bald. And then there was another time coming through the Smokies. But, I was never cold from the rain. I only got snowed on, in the very beginning in Georgia, and then again in the Smokies. Yeah. But the weather was great. Yeah, really good.
Absolutely loved it. So talk about your summit day. Was it just the two of you? Or I know you went with this ridiculous hat, but big ridiculous yellow hat. Don't know where that fit. Was it just the two of you went up together, or were you with some other people?
No, we were in a pretty good sized group. Cushy was with us,
yes,
and then Doc and Solo. Who else was in there? There was a bunch of people up there. Runaway Jim was with us.
Oh, was he?
And Mooney.
Right.
Mooney was with
Mooney,
us.
Yeah, cool, dear me. So you had a lot of you up there. Did you pretty much stay together through the summit? Were you all climbing together within a couple of yards, 20, 50, 100 yards of each other?
No, as a matter of fact, there were like four of us that got a little bit of a later start.
All right.
But we caught up. right before the tablelands. And then we all just kind of hiked up together. We hung out for an hour or so up there, and then we all came down the mountain together. And then, we had champagne down at the bottom, like away from the park.
Yeah, good.
Not in the park.
Quite right, so. So what was it like at the top? Was it lousy weather or good weather?
We were socked in. Okay. And it did start raining a little bit while we were up top, but it lasted for like maybe a minute, 2 minutes. And then, it stayed pretty much foggy the whole time we were up there, but it was fun. I mean, I don't think you can have a bad summit. I don't see how you could.
I think you're 100% right. You can't have a bad summit. I mean, it would be nice if it was sunny, but if it wasn't sunny, it wasn't sunny. But you just touch that side, and you get all sorts of feelings wash over you. How did you feel? Were you relieved it was over?
Yeah, I kind of was. I just sat there for a little bit, and I just kind of looked at Shark Tooth. I'm like, what now? Do we go down the mountain? Do we hang out here for a little bit longer? We all kind of talked about it. We're all sitting up on the mountain. It's like, well, should we leave, or what do you guys want to do? It's like, what do we do?
You've lost your purpose, haven't you? Isn't that amazing? You've lost your purpose. And someone said to me, it's that you lose all the, not the adrenaline flowing through your body, it's a long word anyway, I can't remember what it was, all the pheromones maybe running through your body, and suddenly that you haven't got that target anymore. So what have you been doing since you've been back home? Because people do sometimes slip into a bit of a depression. How do you feel now you're back?
Oh, I'm great. Honestly, I haven't had any problems. I think I'm just so excited to be retired at this point. And right. I have tried running. I got a 10-miler I was supposed to run in November, but for some reason, I don't know if the trail did this to me, but I've re-aggravated an injury in my calf, and I just can't get running. I think my running days might be over.
All right. But are your hiking days over, though?
No.
All right.
Definitely not. No, I've definitely started watching videos and doing research on a few different trails. Wow. I'm already talking about 2021, going out and doing a long trail. Next summer, I'm looking at either doing the East Coast Trail up in Newfoundland, or I'm possibly looking at the Colorado Trail.
That looks beautiful.
Probably not through. Beautiful. Yeah, I know. I probably won't thru-hike it next summer. I'll probably just take a couple weeks and do half of it. Right. But I'm also thinking about the Camino. I don't know why. And then, the West Highland Way?
It's funny, isn't it? I think the 80 gives you, not so much gives you permission, but makes you realise there's nothing you can't do now. I think so. That's why I feel about it. There's just nothing you can't do now. If you want to do it, you can do it. And so you feel. Did you feel that feeling of accomplishment when you finished? Does it feel good to be a thru hiker?
Yeah, it's a cool story. I mean, when people ask you, well, what'd you do when you retired? And I tell them, well, I walked from Georgia to Maine. They're like, oh yeah, okay, like they're not listening. Then all of a sudden it hits them, and they're like, wait, what did you just say? And I'm like, I walked from Georgia to Maine, and they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Just like, well,
people can't relate.
Back on, and I'm like, I walked 2,200 miles, and they're like, wow. So it's pretty cool.
Well, I'm glad that we I'm glad we met in the first place, but I'm also glad you were part of the Mighty Blue class of 2019, because that makes 3 of us have made it to the end so far, and one's still out there, although she may have finished by now. I must contact her soon. But appreciate you coming back and telling us about it, Nate, and we'll catch up again soon, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to be back on again sometime.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy. Bye.
All right.
I must say, when I was thinking about the class of 2019, I never had the slightest doubt about Nate's ability to finish the trail. There was an inevitability about his hike that it seemed that he just had to turn up to do it. It takes a lot more than just turning up, of course, but whatever it takes to finish, Nate had it in abundance. By the way, a few weeks ago, I reached out to this audience and asked for a woman of a certain age to be the subject of a new podcast for 2020. Basically, I'm looking to follow the journey of a woman past the age of 50 and someone whose personality and drive will make her an interesting subject to follow next year. I think it's 5, maybe 6 emails on the subject, and thus 5 or 6 candidates. I haven't responded to them yet, but wanted them to know, assuming that they're still listening to the show, that I'll be in touch with each of them soon to try to work out the candidate I think will be the best for you to listen to. So please, if you've already written to me, I haven't ignored you. I'm just trying to prioritise a few things first. Additionally, if you'd still like to be considered, that means there's still time. So write to me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. Lastly today, we're up to Chapter 4 of Hiking Through, where Paul gives some context to what he's feeling on that first rainy, sleepless night on the AT. I'll see you next week. Chapter 4, The Narrow Way. Every year, approximately 4 million people visit Ohio's Amish country, hoping for a respite from their busy lives. They come to enjoy the scenic beauty and the slower lifestyle of the Amish and Mennonites. I grew up as part of that community, insulated from the outside world. But the quiet, rural community I knew as a child was transformed by the wealth tourists brought to town. Tourist dollars became a vital source of income for area residents, and restaurants, shops, furniture stores, inns, flea markets and cheese factories soon dotted the landscape. Most of these shops are closed on Sundays. Consequently, most of the tourist crowd leaves by Saturday night and is deprived of witnessing our number one industry, religion. Unlike most communities that appear to have a mix of bars and churches, the community of my childhood had only churches. That was fine, since no one had a thirst for alcohol, or so I thought. Churches sprouted up everywhere. In my community, spreading the gospel sometimes meant moving down the road a few miles and building a new church. Often this migration was prompted by disagreements within a congregation on superficial things like dress, colour of vehicles, and other vital issues that determine eternal destiny. In this mix of churchology, I formed early beliefs and learned lessons about life and leadership. It was very clear that my outward appearance mattered more than my inward condition. Sure, we were taught salvation, but salvation was contingent on obedience to a strict regimen of rules. The straight and narrow path that was intended to deliver me to life everlasting seemed as narrow and precarious as a balance beam. Shortly after I was born into an Amish family, my parents decided to leave that church and, as the saying goes, jump the fence. The fence we jumped was quite low, and we landed in a conservative Mennonite church that was not far removed from our previous Amish beliefs. Now we could travel by car instead of horse and buggy, and we were soon the proud owners of a Studebaker. To this day, the Studebaker is on my short list of the ugliest vehicles ever made, but that first car did expand my horizons, since now we could travel farther and visit other churches. Visits to other congregations were pretty much the extent of our exploration of the wider world. As time passed, riding in the old Studebaker became dangerous. Sometimes the right rear door popped open if a passenger was forgetful enough to lean against it. After my sister fell out of the car one day on our way to church, Dad realised the old car had to go. At the car dealer's lot, a 1956 Pontiac captivated my dad. A thing of beauty, it gleamed with shining chrome. Chief Pontiac himself perched on the front hood. There was a problem, though. Our church strictly forbade 2 colours on our cars. This shiny Pontiac would be labelled a Sinmobile. After discussing this dilemma with the car salesman, Dad agreed to a compromise. The price was adjusted so that we could afford to repaint the car. We drove home in bliss, swathed in yellow and chrome, with the magic sounds of the radio drifting from the dashboard. Of course, the church would not permit a radio, so we would have to remove the antenna with a hacksaw. Somehow I convinced my dad to delay that amputation for a few days, and I would sneak into the grass to enjoy stolen moments of the wonder of radio. This was just one of the enticements to adventure that would beset me as I lived out years of convoluted attempts to stay on the straight and narrow way. Dad soon discovered my malfeasance, and I watched with sadness as the hacksaw removed my connection to the outside world. We waited for the body shop to schedule the paint job, and I took great joy in the delay. I rode up front whenever I could, hoping all my friends would see me in this beautiful vehicle. But my dad parked it behind the church on Sundays, attempting to hide it from judgmental eyes. On the day the yellow chariot was painted, it left our house a thing of beauty, but returned in the evening a dark blue version of its former glorious self. Maybe the church was right. That 2-tone car did have me feeling mighty proud, and wasn't pride a sin? One day I made an exhilarating discovery. It was Saturday, our routine car washing day. I brought out the green hose and laid it on the ground, waiting for the sunshine to make the vinyl pliable enough to unroll. Then I climbed into the car and fiddled with the radio controls. Of course, there was only static. Even so, I still enjoyed pressing the buttons and moving back and forth across the dial. Later, as I washed the front fender, I heard a voice coming from inside the car. I had inadvertently rested my hand on the said little nub that was all that remained of the audio antenna. When I pulled my hand away, the sound of the radio died. I touched the nub again, and the voice came from the dashboard. I was a human antenna. Never has there been an inventor more thrilled with his discovery. After several hours of forbidden entertainment, I smugly joined my family at lunch, with no intention of revealing my discovery. But it wasn't long afterward that Dad came into the house, bewildered. The car wouldn't start. Dead battery, he thought. Oops. I knew the cause, but I would not be confessing. Instead, I noted that if my secret entertainment was to continue, I would have to start the engine occasionally to keep that battery charged. Of course, it's impossible to keep secrets of this magnitude for very long. I could not resist passing on my knowledge to friends at church, and they also became human antennae, and were thus exposed to evil worldly influences like Cleveland Indians baseball, sports shows, mind-corroding country music, and seductive beer jingles. Unfortunately, one of us Mennonite Marconis was eventually busted, and the preachers discovered our secret. A new edict came forth. Whenever a car was purchased, the entire radio must be removed. Cars in the church parking lot now sported gaping holes in the dash. The new policy came too late. We had been exposed to the influences of the world. There was no return to our pre-radio innocence. I was further modernised when a cousin in great emotional distress offered to sell me his 8-transistor AM/FM radio. Evidently, the preaching had convinced him of his sinfulness, and under deep conviction, he offered me the offending device for $6. This was even better than secret sin in the Pontiac. Best of all, I was now mobile. In the woods, behind the barn, even climbing trees, I was never without my connection to the outside world. Yes, I confess, I listened to every Indians game and knew all the country music tunes. On Friday and Saturday nights, I would hide downstairs in the fruit cellar to listen to the Grand Ole Opry from Nashville. But the constant sermonizing against the wilds of the devil eventually prodded me into compliance, and I decided it was time to end my disobedience. My rehabilitated conscience contrived a plan to destroy the evil thing. My father, now a bona fide Pontiac man, had traded the 56 for a newer, bigger 59. I was allowed to drive the car on our property. I decided to crush the tempting radio by backing over it with the Pontiac. After one farewell twirl through the dial, I laid the offensive thing in the gravel behind the rear wheel and proceeded to back over it. For good measure, I drove forward and then backed over the defenceless little radio again. The poor thing was now completely smashed. I picked it up, and the 9-volt battery dangled by 2 wires connecting it to the transistors board. The white plastic body was completely destroyed, but the guts of the radio still clung together, tenaciously grasping at survival. On a whim, I flipped the on button, and to my surprise, the radio came to life. "It's a miracle," I yelped. "God must not hate this radio after all." That was the sign I needed. The radio had survived the crushing weight of a monster 59 Pontiac, and thus it must not be wrong for me to keep it. So I did. I carried the wounded thing in a little box to keep all the parts together. Besides worldly cars and poison-spewing radios, there were many other insidious evils out to destroy us. We heard constant warnings from the pulpit. Television, for example, was moving into more liberal Mennonite churches, but was strictly forbidden in our congregation. Our minister heard of a Mennonite family that actually had a TV in their basement. He predicted it would just be a matter of time until that television climbed those basement steps and settled into the living room. "Sin is creeping in," was his constant lament. He was right, of course, and by some mysterious power that TV did eventually climb those stairs. Those preachers were right just often enough that I wondered if maybe they actually did have a special spiritual insight. Another pulpit prophecy concerned head coverings and women's hairstyles. Our church taught that outward appearance was to set us apart from the world, but I observed that the ladies carried the burden of this non-conformity requirement. The men were hardly discernible from their worldly neighbours, but the women were obedient from head to toe to the point of wrapping themselves like mummies. The ladies may have looked happy, but I always thought their hair was combed and bobby-pinned so tightly that their smiles were stretched into place. And over this tightly bound coiffure, every woman was required to wear a head covering. Once again, the liberal Mennonites in the community proved the prophetic foresight of my preacher. He predicted that when women were allowed to wear their hair down, in no time the hair would be cut and head coverings would get smaller and smaller. What he failed to see was that coverings would disappear altogether in many Mennonite churches. Today, when you visit Amish country, you'll witness an amalgamation of religious headgear of all shapes and sizes. As I matured, I began questioning the teachings of the church. For example, the preacher talked often about inviting Jesus into our hearts. I was a literal thinker and just could not grasp such a concept. Would he bring a moving van and set up residence in my physical heart? I recall a young man in our church who went to the altar to receive Jesus into his heart almost every time an altar call was made. What had happened to Jesus? Was it so easy to lose Jesus that you had to ask him repeatedly to return to his heart home? And I was troubled by a new fear. Preachers talked about the second coming of Jesus. Even when I thought I finally understood the concept of Christianity, I was not quite ready to accept it and live it. Now I was hearing that Jesus could return the second time before I had even accepted him the first time. One night when I was 16, I drove alone to church. Dad was generous with the car as long as my destination was church. A visiting minister from Nebraska was holding a series of revival meetings, and he was a real pulpit pounder. That memorable night, my body was in the pew, but my mind managed to escape and went roaming around the outside world. A sharp rapping on the podium brought mind back to body at once. That preacher had knuckles of steel. I have never heard such a riveting sound as those knuckles rapping on the wooden podium. Then, grasping both sides of the podium, he leaned forward and nearly shouted, "Jesus is coming soon! Get ready! He may come back tonight!" That preacher and his rapping knuckles managed to scare several of my friends into the kingdom. But I held out. As I drove home later, gripping the wheel with both hands, I looked nervously up into the night sky, expecting Jesus to burst through at any moment. I was scared. I begged him not to come back just yet. I still wanted to experience a number of things, and I doubted that Jesus would want to be anywhere near my heart while I was testing life. That first rainy, sleepless night on the AT, I reflected on the restrictions I still felt on my path to everlasting life. I had left my parents' church and married a liberal Mennonite girl, who did indeed cut her hair and phase out her head covering. I owned a television and bought any kind of car I could afford. I went to Cleveland Indians games and even movies. I embraced Christianity in a form different from the conservative churches. Yet still I felt precarious on that balance beam, fearful of any misstep. I had vague expectation that the Appalachian Trail might lead me through experiences that would push out the tight boundaries of my life. In the early hours of the morning, I made my resolution. On this trek, I would submerge myself in the traditions and life of the trail and openly meet new thoughts and ideas. And I would leave behind my lifelong travelling companion, guilt.